The great hall of Wildfire Manor smelled of blood and betrayal, though Neve Ashford was the only one who could taste the second scent coating her tongue like copper and ash. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by wolves who had once called her sister, healer, friend, and now stared at her with eyes full of murder. She killed my baby. Luna Serena Wildfire's voice cracked with theatrical grief, her slender hand pressed to her flat stomach where, only yesterday, a child had grown. I trusted her. I let her touch me, let her work her so-called healing magic, and she— a sob tore from the Luna's throat. She poisoned me. No. The word screamed through Neve's mind, but her lips remained frozen, her tongue thick and useless in her mouth. She hadn't poisoned anyone. She had done everything in her power to save that baby, had worked through the night with herbs and healing light and desperate prayers to the moon goddess. But something dark had been at work in the Luna's blood. Something Neve hadn't recognized until it was too late. Something the Luna had put there herself. Neve knew the truth. She had tasted it in the strange bitterness beneath the Luna's skin, had seen the flash of satisfaction in Serena's eyes when the bleeding started. But who would believe the word of a disgraced Omega against the beloved Luna of Wildfire Pack? Dominic. Neve turned to the man who had claimed her 3 months ago, the Alpha whose mark still burned faintly on her shoulder. A mark given without her consent, taken while she lay drugged and helpless in what was supposed to be a healing sleep. Please. You know I would never— Silence. Dominic Wildfire's voice cut through the hall like a blade. He stood beside his true mate, his chosen Luna, his handsome face twisted with disgust as he looked at Neve. You dare speak my name after what you've done? You did this to me, she wanted to scream. You claimed me against my will. You put this child in my belly. And now you would let your Luna frame me for murder to hide your sins? But the words wouldn't come. They never did. Not when Dominic's alpha command pressed against her will like iron chains. I renounce this bond. Dominic's words fell like hammer blows, each one sending pain lancing through the incomplete mark on Neve's shoulder. I renounce you as my mate. I renounce any claim to the abomination you carry in your womb. Neve's hand flew to her stomach, to the tiny flutter of life she had only just begun to feel. Her baby, her child, conceived in violence but loved nonetheless. Loved with every fiber of her being from the moment she had sensed its presence growing within her. No, she whispered. Please, Alpha, the baby is innocent. The baby is a bastard. Serena's voice dripped with venom, her grief forgotten in the face of her triumph. A healer's whelp, nothing more. Perhaps not even Dominic's at all. Who knows how many wolves this whore has spread her legs for? Laughter rippled through the assembled pack. Neve felt their contempt washing over her in waves, felt her wolf, already weakened by the forced claiming, cowering in the depths of her soul. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Remove her from my sight. Dominic turned his back, dismissing her as if she were nothing, as if she had never been anything at all. And make sure she understands the consequences of ever returning to Wildfire territory. Strong hands seized Neve's arms, dragging her toward the great doors of the hall. She recognized the scent of the wolf who held her, Victor Wildfire, Dominic's younger brother, whose cruel smile had haunted her nightmares since the night of her claiming. I've been waiting for this, Victor breathed against her ear, his grip tightening until she felt her bones grind together. My brother might have been too soft to put you in your proper place, but I have no such weakness. He dragged her through the manor, past servants who averted their eyes, past pack members who spat at her feet. Neve stumbled, her healer's robes tangling around her legs, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. They reached the great stone staircase that led down from the manor's entrance. 50 steps of unforgiving granite, polished smooth by centuries of feet. Victor's hand shifted to the back of her neck, his claws extending just enough to prick her skin. Any last words, healer? His breath was hot against her cheek. Any final curse you'd like to throw at the family you tried to destroy? Neve's throat tightened. She thought of her baby, of the fragile life depending on her for protection. She thought of all the patients she had healed, all the lives she had saved, all the good she had tried to do in a pack that had never truly wanted her. The moon goddess sees all, she said quietly. She knows the truth. And one day, she will demand payment for these sins. Victor laughed and pushed her down the stairs. Time seemed to slow as Neve fell. She felt her body tip forward, felt her feet leave the ground, felt the terrible weightlessness of her descent. Her arms wrapped instinctively around her stomach, trying to protect her child even as the stone steps rushed up to meet her. She heard herself scream, heard the gasp of the wolves watching from the doorway, heard Victor's mocking laughter echoing down the stairwell. I'm sorry, she thought desperately, speaking to the life within her. I'm so sorry. I tried. Strong arms caught her mid-fall. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, but it wasn't the bone-shattering crash of stone she had expected. Instead, she found herself pressed against a wall of warm, solid muscle, held securely by arms that felt like bands of steel wrapped in velvet. And then the heat came. It started in her chest, a spark that ignited into a blaze, spreading outward through her veins like honey poured into her blood. Warm, so impossibly warm, as if she had been cold her entire life and only now discovered what it meant to stand in sunlight. Her wolf, dormant, broken, barely a whisper in the back of her mind, suddenly surged awake with a howl that shook the very foundations of her soul. Mate. The word thundered through her with the force of a revelation. True mate. She heard a sharp intake of breath above her, felt the arms around her tighten with sudden, fierce possessiveness. A low growl vibrated through the chest pressed against her cheek, a sound so primal and raw that it made every hair on her body stand on end. Neve looked up. The man who held her was a stranger, travel-worn and dusty, his dark hair tied back from a face that looked carved from stone and shadow. He wore the plain armor of a common soldier, battered and road-stained, and there was nothing about him that should have marked him as anything special. Nothing except his eyes. They blazed pure, molten gold, the color of an alpha's power at its absolute peak, and they were fixed on her face with an intensity that stole what remained of her breath. Who? The stranger growled, his voice rough as gravel and deep as the earth itself. Dares to lay hands on what is mine? Neve's heart stopped. The mark on her shoulder, Dominic's mark, burned with sudden vicious pain, as if recognizing a rival claim. But the warmth flooding through her body was stronger, brighter, more real than anything she had ever felt before. This couldn't be happening. She had already been claimed, already been marked, already been broken by one alpha's touch. The mate bond was supposed to be singular, permanent, inescapable. Yet here she was, cradled in a stranger's arms, feeling the unmistakable pull of a connection that made her bond with Dominic feel like a pale imitation, a shadow compared to the sun. The soldier's eyes moved from her face to the stairs above them, where Victor stood frozen in shock. When the stranger spoke again, his voice carried the unmistakable weight of command, not just an alpha's authority, but something older, deeper, more absolute. I asked you a question, pup. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they made Victor flinch as if he had been struck. Who? Touched. Her. Victor's face cycled through a dozen expressions: confusion, fear, defiance, and finally a sneer of contempt. She's a criminal and a murderer. Wildfire pack business. Nothing to do with... She is my mate. The stranger's declaration rang through the stairwell like a bell, and Neve felt the truth of it resonate in her very bones. She is under my protection. And you, his golden eyes narrowed to slits, you threw her down 50 steps of stone while she carries a child in her womb. The color drained from Victor's face. I didn't, I mean, she's not, I can hear its heartbeat. The stranger's voice was deceptively calm, but his arms trembled slightly around Neve, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. I can feel her terror through a bond that only just awakened. Do you have any idea what I should do to you for this offense? Victor's wolf must have recognized what his conscious mind had not yet grasped, because the younger wildfire took an involuntary step backward, his face going pale as milk. Who are you? The stranger smiled, and there was nothing kind in the expression. No one of consequence. Yet. He shifted Neve in his arms, adjusting his grip so that she was cradled against his chest like something precious, something worth protecting. Tell your alpha that if he wishes to discuss the fate of this woman and her child, he may send word to the Duskwalker stronghold. I will be happy to educate him on the proper treatment of mates. Neve's breath caught. Duskwalker. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. The Duskwalker clan ruled the Eastern Territories, a kingdom of wolves so powerful that even the great packs of the Central Lands paid them tribute and respect. They were led by a king, an alpha among alphas, whose power was said to rival the moon goddess herself. But this man was just a soldier, just a common warrior in dusty armor, with calloused hands and road-worn boots. He couldn't possibly be. Rest, the stranger murmured, looking down at her with eyes that had softened from blazing gold to warm amber. You are safe now. I swear it on my blood and my bond. Neve wanted to protest, wanted to explain that she wasn't safe, could never be safe, that Dominic would come for her, and his brother would seek revenge, and her baby would never know a moment's peace. But the warmth of the bond was spreading through her, and her wolf was purring with a contentment she had never known, and his arms were so strong around her, so impossibly secure. I don't even know your name, she whispered. Something flickered in his golden eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. Alexander, he said softly. Alexander Duskwalker. She stiffened at the title, another alpha, another claim, and he must have felt it, because his arms tightened reassuringly around her. Not like him, he promised, his voice fierce with sincerity. Never like him. I can feel your fear through the bond, the shadows of what you've endured. But I swear to you, little healer, I will never take what you do not freely give. Tears pricked at Neve's eyes. She had heard promises before. She had believed them before, and she had learned, in the most painful way possible, exactly what men's promises were worth. But her wolf trusted this stranger completely. Her wolf, who had cowered and hidden from Dominic Wildfire's every touch, was pressing against the inside of her skin, yearning toward this man with an intensity she had never known. Why? The question escaped her before she could stop it. Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't know what they're accusing me of. I know enough. His thumb brushed gently across her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I know that my mate is hurt and frightened. I know that she carries a child and was thrown down a flight of stairs. I know that her pack, he practically spat the word, was willing to watch her die rather than offer her justice or mercy. He began to move, carrying her down the remaining stairs as if she weighed nothing at all. Neve could hear shouting behind them, Victor's voice, raised in alarm, calling for guards. But the stranger's pace never faltered. There will be time for questions later, he said quietly. Time for explanations, for decisions, for whatever you need to feel safe again. But right now, all that matters is getting you away from this place and into the care of a proper healer. I am a healer, Neve said weakly. A small smile crossed his face, the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him. Then you should know better than anyone that healers make the worst patients. Let someone else tend you, just this once. They emerged from the manor into the cold morning air. Horses waited in the courtyard, a full company of soldiers in the silver and black of Duskwalker colors. Every single one of them turned toward their commander, their eyes widening as they took in the woman in his arms. "My king!" one of them started. "Not now, Kale." The stranger, the king, moon goddess help her, strode toward the largest of the horses without breaking stride. "We ride for home, now." But the negotiations are over. Alexander Duskwalker swung into the saddle with Neve still cradled against his chest, arranging her across his lap with surprising gentleness. "Any pack that treats its omegas as Wildfire has done is no ally I wish to court. We'll find other trade routes." The soldier named Kale looked as if he wanted to argue, but something in his king's face must have warned him against it. He simply nodded, swinging onto his own horse and barking orders to the rest of the company. As they rode through the gates of Wildfire Manor, Neve allowed herself one last look back at the place that had been her prison for 3 months. She saw Victor on the steps, surrounded by guards, his face contorted with rage. She saw servants peering from windows, their expressions a mixture of shock and speculation. And high above, in the window of the Alpha's chambers, she saw a flash of golden hair and a face twisted with fury. "He knows," she realized with a cold surge of terror. "Dominic Wildfire knows someone has taken me, and he will come." The man holding her must have felt her fear spike through their new bond because his arm tightened around her waist. "Whatever you're afraid of," he murmured against her hair, "we will face it together. You are not alone anymore, Neve. You will never be alone again." She didn't know how he knew her name. She didn't know why the moon goddess had chosen to give her a second mate when her first still lived. She didn't know what would happen when Dominic Wildfire came to reclaim what he considered his property. But as the horses carried her away from the manor, as the warmth of the bond continued to spread through her tired body, as her wolf settled into a peace she had never known, Neve allowed herself, for the first time in months, to hope. The rhythm of hoofbeats against hard-packed earth became a kind of music, steady and relentless, carrying Neve further from everything she had known. She kept her eyes closed against the morning light, not quite sleeping but drifting in that strange space between waking and dreams where the body rests, even as the mind continues its endless churning. The warmth hadn't faded. She had expected it to, had braced herself for the moment when this impossible heat would dissipate like morning mist, revealing itself as nothing more than shock and desperate hope. But with each passing mile, the sensation only grew stronger. It pulsed through her veins in time with the heartbeat she could feel against her back, radiating outward from every point where her body pressed against his arm around her waist, his chest supporting her weight, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair at her temple. Mate. Her wolf pressed the word into her consciousness again, insistent and certain in a way that made Neve want to weep. How could she trust this feeling? How could she believe in the bond when she had felt something similar? Lesser, yes, but still undeniable. When Dominic Wildfire had first touched her? She had thought that meant something too, before she learned exactly how wrong she could be. "You're trembling." The voice rumbled through her, low and concerned, and Neve realized with a start that she was shaking. Not from cold. The man's body heat surrounded her like a furnace, but from the effort of holding everything inside. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the lie slipping out before she could stop it. "No." His arm tightened slightly around her waist, not confining but steadying. "You are not fine. You were thrown down a flight of stairs while carrying a child. You were betrayed by your pack and nearly murdered by your Alpha's brother. You are exhausted and hurt and frightened." A pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had gentled. "You do not need to pretend otherwise, not with me." Neve's throat constricted. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such simple, direct concern? When was the last time anyone had looked at her and seen a person rather than a tool, a possession, a problem to be solved? "I don't understand," she whispered. The words escaped before she could stop them, giving voice to the chaos in her mind. "I don't understand any of this. I was already claimed. I'm already marked." She touched her shoulder, where Dominic Wildfire's bite still scarred her skin. The mate bond is supposed to be singular, permanent. How can I feel this when I, may I show you something? The question startled her. She had grown so accustomed to men taking what they wanted that the idea of being asked permission felt almost foreign. "What?" she asked warily. "I would like to stop for a moment, to let you see something that might help you understand." His voice remained steady, patient. "But only if you are willing. If you would rather keep riding, we will keep riding." Neve considered the offer. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to keep running, to put as much distance between herself and Wildfire territory as possible. But her wolf pressed against her skin with unusual insistence, and there was something in his voice, something that made her want to trust him, despite everything. "All right," she said quietly. Alexander Duskwalker raised his hand, and the company of soldiers around them gradually slowed to a halt. They had reached a small clearing in the forest, dappled sunlight filtering through the autumn leaves to paint patterns of gold and shadow on the grass below. "Kyle," he called to the soldier who had spoken earlier. "We rest here for 10 minutes. Set a perimeter." "Yes, my king." The soldiers dispersed with practiced efficiency, fanning out to guard the clearing's edges. Neve watched them go, noting the way they moved, silent and coordinated, more like wolves in their animal form than men in armor. Then Alexander was dismounting, swinging down from the horse with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He reached up for her, his hands hovering at her waist but not quite touching. "May I help you down?" Again the question. Again the choice. "Yes," Neve said. His hands closed around her waist and the heat that had been simmering through her body suddenly blazed to life. She gasped as he lifted her from the horse as if she weighed nothing at all, lowering her gently to the ground until her feet touched the grass. But he didn't release her immediately. He held her steady, his golden eyes searching her face, giving her time to find her balance. She looked up at him properly for the first time since the stairwell. In the chaos of her fall and the flight that followed, she hadn't really seen him. She had registered impressions: dark hair, strong arms, golden eyes, but not the whole. Now, standing before him with the morning light filtering through the trees, she allowed herself to truly look. He was tall. That much she had known from the way he'd carried her. But standing face to face, the reality of his height struck her anew. The top of her head barely reached his chin, and his shoulders were broad enough to block out the sun behind him. His features were sharp and angular, all hard lines and harsh angles that should have made him intimidating. And he was intimidating. She could feel the power rolling off him in waves, an alpha's presence magnified beyond anything she had ever experienced. But his eyes, when they met hers, were impossibly gentle. "Look at your shoulder," he said quietly. "At the mark." Neve's hand moved automatically to cover the place where Dominic Wildfire had bitten her, shame and revulsion twisting in her gut. She didn't want to look at it. She had avoided looking at it for 3 months, hated the sight of it, wished every day that she could tear it from her skin. "Please," he said, "just for a moment." Slowly, reluctantly, she pulled aside the collar of her torn healer's robes. The mark was there, as it always was. A raised scar in the shape of teeth, silvery white against her skin. But something was different. The mark had always looked angry, inflamed, as if the wound had never quite healed. It had burned constantly, a low-level pain she had learned to ignore because ignoring it was easier than acknowledging what it meant. Now, instead of the furious red she had grown accustomed to, the edges of the mark were darkening. Not infected. Nothing so simple as that. But fading. Dying. Like a brand that had been seared into dead wood and was slowly crumbling to ash. "A forced claiming," Alexander said, and there was cold fury buried beneath the gentleness of his voice, "is not a true mate bond. It is a corruption. A violation of everything the moon goddess intended when she created the connection between mates." Neve stared at the fading mark, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "He claimed me," she said numbly. "He bit me. He—" The words stuck in her throat, memories she had tried so hard to bury clawing their way to the surface. "He took everything from me. He took nothing that was his to take." Alexander's voice was fierce now, burning with righteous anger, but not at her. Never at her. A true mate bond cannot be forced. It can only be freely given. What he did to you was not claiming. It was assault. It was theft. And it could never have created a real connection, because a real connection requires consent from both souls involved. Tears were streaming down Neve's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "Then why did it hurt? Why did I feel the bond?" "Because he broke something in you." Alexander's hands lifted, hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her, but wouldn't without permission. "He used dark magic, blood magic probably, to force a facsimile of the bond into your body. It felt real because it was designed to feel real, but it was never true. It was always a cage dressed up as a home. And now? Now you have found your true mate." He said it simply, without arrogance or demand. Just a statement of fact, like the sky was blue or water was wet. "The real bond is waking in your blood, and it is burning away the false one. By the time the sun sets today, his mark will be nothing but a scar. It will no longer hold any power over you." Neve's knees buckled. She would have fallen, but Alexander caught her. Of course he caught her. She was beginning to realize he would always catch her, and lowered her gently to the ground. She sat in the grass, her hands pressed to the earth, her chest heaving with sobs she could no longer contain. 3 months. 3 months of agony and fear and the constant, grinding knowledge that she was trapped. That the bond in her blood would tie her to her rapist forever. That even if she managed to escape him physically, some part of her would always belong to him. And now she was being told it wasn't real. That it had never been real. That the moon goddess had seen her suffering and sent her a way out in the form of a travel-worn king with golden eyes and impossibly gentle hands. "I don't understand," she choked out between sobs. "Why? Why would you? Why would the goddess? Why me?" Alexander knelt before her in the grass, heedless of his armor or his kingly dignity. "I don't know why the goddess does anything," he admitted. "I gave up trying to understand her plans a long time ago. But I know what I feel. I know what woke in my blood the moment I touched you. And I know—" He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rough with emotion. "I know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this gift she has given me." Neve looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. "You don't even know me." "I know that you are brave," he said immediately. "You faced the entire wildfire pack with your head held high, even when they condemned you. I know that you are kind. Your wolf carries the echo of healing in its essence, and that gift is not given to cruel hearts. I know that you are strong, because you have survived what would have broken lesser souls." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "And I know that my wolf recognized you the instant it scented you. It looked at you and said finally in a voice I have been waiting my entire life to hear." The bond pulsed between them, warm and bright and utterly undeniable. Neve felt her wolf pressing against her skin again, but this time, instead of fear, she felt something else stirring in her chest. Hope. Fragile and terrified, but hope nonetheless. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now we ride for my stronghold," Alexander said, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "You will be given chambers of your own, with a lock on the door that only you control. You will be seen by my healers and given whatever care you need. And when you are ready, only when you are ready, we will talk about what this bond between us might become." Neve took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. The warmth of his touch flooded through her again, but this time, she didn't flinch away from it. "And if I'm never ready?" she asked quietly. Alexander's expression didn't change. "Then you will still have a home in my kingdom. You will still be protected, respected, cared for. The bond does not require consummation to give you that much." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I told you on those stairs, and I will tell you as many times as you need to hear it. I will never take what you do not freely give." Neve stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any trace of deception. But all she found was steady sincerity, patience, and a warmth that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within his soul. "You're nothing like him," she said finally. "I should hope not." A hint of a smile crossed his face, the first she had seen from him that carried any lightness at all. "I aspire to be many things, but similar to Dominic Wildfire is not among them." Despite everything, despite the horror of the morning and the terror of the months that had preceded it, Neve felt her lips twitch in response. Not quite a smile, not yet, but something close. "We should keep moving," she said. "The longer we stay in one place." "Yes." The brief moment of levity faded from his expression, replaced by the alertness of a warrior. "We have a long ride ahead, and I would prefer to reach the borders of my territory before nightfall." He helped her back onto the horse, and this time, when he settled behind her and his arms came around her waist, she didn't feel quite so trapped. The warmth of the bond continued to pulse through her veins, steady and reassuring, and her wolf had curled up in the back of her mind with a contentment that felt almost like peace. They rode in silence for several hours, the forest gradually giving way to open plains and then to rolling hills, dotted with the first signs of autumn color. The soldiers maintained their formation around the king and his mate, and Neve was beginning to accept, however tentatively, that mate was indeed what she was to him, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. It was late afternoon when they stopped again, this time at a small stream that cut through the hills like a ribbon of silver. The horses needed water, and Neve's back ached from hours in the saddle, and even Alexander Duskwalker admitted that they could afford a brief rest before the final push to his borders. Neve dismounted on her own this time, though she accepted Alexander's steadying hand when her legs wobbled beneath her. She walked to the edge of the stream and knelt on the bank, splashing cold water on her face and trying to wash away the dust and tears of the morning. "My king." She looked up to find the soldier Kale approaching Alexander, his expression grim. The two men moved away from the stream, speaking in low voices that Neve couldn't quite make out. She watched them from the corner of her eye, noting the tension in Alexander's shoulders, the way his hand moved instinctively to the sword at his hip. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She was on her feet instantly, spinning to face the threat, her healer's training forgotten in the face of raw survival instinct. But it was only a soldier, a young man with pale hair and a sneer that reminded her, with sickening intensity, of Victor Wildfire. "So this is our king's new pet," the soldier said, looking her up and down with undisguised contempt. "I always knew he'd come back from Wildfire with something. I just expected it to be a trade agreement, not a discarded whore." Neve's blood turned to ice. She had heard words like this before, had heard worse, in the 3 months she had spent as Dominic Wildfire's dirty secret. But somehow, After the kindness of the morning, after the hope that had begun to blossom in her chest, the cruelty of this stranger's words cut deeper than they should have. "I'm not," she started, but her voice came out weak, barely a whisper. "Not what?" The soldier took a step closer, and Neve instinctively retreated until her back was against a tree. "Not a whore? That's not what I heard. Victor Wildfire himself told me what you are. Said you spread your legs for half the pack before his brother finally got tired of sharing. That's not true." The words came out stronger this time, fueled by anger rather than fear. "None of that is true." "Oh, I'm sure it isn't." The soldier's smile widened. "I'm sure our noble king saw you falling down those stairs, and just happened to feel a mate bond spring to life. What a convenient coincidence." He leaned closer, his breath hot on her face. "You're pretty. I'll give you that. Pretty enough to make a man believe whatever story you're selling. But some of us aren't as easily fooled as—" He didn't get to finish the sentence. One moment he was looming over her, his presence suffocating and threatening. The next, he was on the ground 15 feet away, having been thrown there by a force that seemed to come from nowhere. Alexander Duskwalker stood where the soldier had been, his eyes blazing pure gold, a snarl distorting his features into something barely human. The air around him crackled with power, true alpha power, the kind that made every wolf in the vicinity drop their heads in instinctive submission. "Lorcan," Alexander said, and his voice was nothing like the gentle rumble Neve had grown accustomed to. It was cold. It was deadly. It was the voice of a king who had ordered executions and would not hesitate to order another. "What, precisely, do you think you are doing?" The soldier, Lorcan, scrambled to his feet, all trace of his earlier arrogance gone. He was pale, shaking, his wolf clearly cowering beneath the weight of his king's fury. "My king, I was just— I only meant to—" "You were just harassing my mate." Alexander took a step forward, and Lorcan stumbled back. "You were just repeating slander fed to you by the very men who tried to murder her this morning. You were just threatening a pregnant woman who has been through more trauma in the past 3 months than you will likely experience in your entire miserable life. I didn't know. You didn't care." Another step. Lorcan's back hit a tree, and he had nowhere left to run. "You saw a woman alone and vulnerable, and you saw an opportunity to make yourself feel powerful by tearing her down." The other soldiers had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. None of them looked sympathetic to Lorcan's plight. If anything, several of them looked almost eager, as if they had been waiting for their king to deal with this particular problem child for some time. "She is my mate," Alexander said, and the words rang through the clearing like a royal decree. "She is under my protection, and any insult to her is an insult to me." He turned away from Lorcan, dismissing the trembling soldier from his attention, and strode toward Neve. His expression softened as he approached, the blazing gold of his eyes fading to warm amber. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Neve nodded, not quite trusting her voice. "He won't bother you again." Alexander glanced back over his shoulder, where Lorcan was still pressed against the tree, surrounded by soldiers who looked decidedly unfriendly. "He will be disciplined when we reach the stronghold. Such behavior is not tolerated in my kingdom, least of all from those who serve me directly." "You didn't have to—" Neve started. "Yes," Alexander interrupted gently. "I did." He reached out, and this time he didn't hesitate before touching her face. His palm cupped her cheek, warm and steady, and Neve found herself leaning into the contact despite herself. "You are my mate, Neve. Whether or not you ever choose to accept that bond fully, you are entitled to my protection, and I will not, I cannot, stand by while anyone threatens or demeans you." Her wolf pressed against her skin, practically purring at the display of protectiveness. "Mate," it whispered again. "Good mate. Strong mate." Safe. And for the first time, Neve allowed herself to believe it. Thank you, she said softly. Alexander's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. No thanks necessary. This is simply who I am. Who I will always be. Where you are concerned. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and bond and the growing warmth between them. Then Alexander dropped his hand and took a step back, giving her space. We should ride, he said. The border is only a few hours away, and I would feel better with you safely inside my territory before dark. Neve nodded. She let him help her back onto the horse, and when his arms came around her this time, she didn't just tolerate the contact. She welcomed it. The final hours of the journey passed in a kind of peaceful blur. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and Neve found herself watching it with something like wonder. Had it only been this morning that she had faced the wildfire pack's condemnation? Had it only been hours since Victor's hands had shoved her toward death? It felt like a lifetime. It felt like another world. As they crested the final hill, Neve caught her first glimpse of Duskwalker territory. The land stretched out before them in rolling waves of green and gold, punctuated by dark forests and silver rivers. In the distance, she could see the outline of a massive stone fortress, the Duskwalker stronghold, she assumed. Its towers reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for the moon. Welcome to your new home, Alexander said quietly, his breath warm against her hair. Neve stared at the vista before her, at the beauty and the space, and the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. It's beautiful, she whispered. Not half as beautiful as you. She turned to look at him, startled by the unexpected compliment, and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart clench in her chest. There was admiration there, yes, and desire, but also something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. You don't have to say things like that, she said, suddenly self-conscious. I know what I look like. I haven't slept properly in months. I'm covered in bruises. My robes are torn. You look like the answer to every prayer I never knew how to speak. The words were simple, sincere, and they stopped her mid-sentence. You look like hope, Neve. You look like home. Her wolf howled in the back of her mind, a sound of pure joy that echoed through every fiber of her being. And as the horses began their descent toward the stronghold, as the last light of day painted the world in shades of amber and rose, Neve felt the final, lingering fear in her heart begin to crack. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever truly trust again, truly love again, truly give herself to someone without the fear of being broken. But she knew that she was willing to try. And for now, that was enough. The fortress gates opened before them like great stone jaws, and Neve felt a tremor run through her body that had nothing to do with fear. The walls rose impossibly high, carved from dark granite that seemed to absorb the fading light rather than reflect it. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across weathered stone that spoke of centuries of history, of battles fought and won, of a lineage that stretched back to the first wolves who had walked beneath the moon. Alexander's arm tightened around her waist as they passed beneath the arched entrance, and she felt his chest expand with what might have been pride or relief or both. "We're home," he said, and the word settled into her bones like a promise. Home. She had never truly had one. The Wildfire Pack House had been a prison dressed in finery, a place where she had learned to make herself small, invisible, unremarkable. Before that, there had been the healer's cottage where she had trained, and before that, the orphanage where she had spent her earliest years with no memory of the parents who had left her there. Home was a concept she understood only in theory, a warmth she had observed in others but never felt for herself. But as the horses clattered across the cobblestone courtyard, as faces appeared in windows and doorways to witness their arrival, as the bond between her and Alexander hummed with a steady, reassuring warmth. Neve allowed herself to imagine that perhaps this could be different. Perhaps this could be real. "My lord!" A woman rushed forward as they dismounted. Her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid, her face lined with age and kindness. "We received word you were returning, but we didn't expect—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes finding Neve's face, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, though Neve was certain they had never met. Understanding, though no words had been exchanged. And then, slowly, a smile that transformed her weathered features into something almost beautiful. "So it's true," she breathed. "The moon goddess has blessed you at last." Alexander's hand found the small of Neve's back, steadying her as her legs trembled from hours in the saddle. "Marin, this is Neve Ashford, my mate." The word sent a shiver through her, equal parts terror and longing. "Neve, this is Marin, the keeper of my household and the closest thing I have to a mother." Marin's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she reached out to take Neve's hands in her own. Her grip was warm and firm, her skin rough from years of honest work. "Welcome, child. Welcome home." She pulled Neve into an embrace before she could react, and for a moment, Neve stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to such open affection from a stranger. Then her wolf stirred, pressing against her consciousness with an insistence she couldn't ignore. "Safe," it whispered. "Pack. Home. Asterisk." And slowly, hesitantly, Neve allowed her arms to rise and return the embrace. "She needs rest," Alexander said, his voice gentle but carrying an undercurrent of command. "A warm bath, a good meal, and a soft bed. She's been through more than anyone should have to endure." Marin pulled back, her hands still gripping Neve's shoulders as she studied her face with the shrewd assessment of a woman who had seen much and understood more. Her gaze lingered on the bruises that still mottled Neve's skin, on the dark circles beneath her eyes, on the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow to fall at any moment. "I can see that," Marin said softly. Then, louder, with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to taking charge. "Elara, draw a bath in the eastern chambers. Finn, have the kitchen send up a tray, soup and bread to start. Nothing too heavy. Move." Servants scattered to obey, and Neve found herself swept along in Marin's wake like a leaf caught in a current. She glanced back at Alexander, suddenly reluctant to leave his side, and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter in her chest. "I'll check on you in a few hours," he promised. "Rest now. You're safe here, Neve. I swear it on my life." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and allowed Marin to lead her into the fortress proper. The eastern chambers turned out to be a suite of rooms larger than the entire cottage where she had trained as a healer. The main room featured a massive four-poster bed draped in deep blue velvet, a fireplace large enough to roast an ox, and windows that looked out over the moonlit forest beyond the walls. A smaller room held a copper tub that servants were already filling with steaming water, while another appeared to be a private sitting room with comfortable chairs and shelves lined with books. "This is too much," Neve whispered, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. "I'm just a healer. I don't need—" "You are the Alpha's mate," Marin interrupted firmly. "You are exactly where you belong." She helped Neve out of her torn and dirty robes with gentle hands, clucking her tongue at each new bruise revealed. "What monsters did this to you?" Neve's throat closed around the answer. The memories were too fresh, too raw. Victor's hands on her arms, the stone steps rushing up to meet her, the sickening certainty that she was going to die with her baby still growing inside her. Marin seemed to understand without needing words. She guided Neve into the bath, and the hot water enveloped her like an embrace, soothing muscles she hadn't realized were clenched tight with tension. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share," Marin said, reaching for a cloth and a bar of soap that smelled of lavender and chamomile. But know that whatever happened, whoever hurt you, they will never touch you again. Our alpha would burn the world to ashes before he let anyone harm his mate. Neve closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep into her bones. He doesn't know me. We only met this morning. The bond knows. Marin's voice was soft but certain. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, child. She brought you to him for a reason, and he to you. Whatever trials lie ahead, you'll face them together. Together. Another word that Neve understood only in theory. She had always faced everything alone. Her training, her service to the wildfire pack, the horror of Dominic Wildfire's forced claiming, the months of abuse that followed. The idea of having someone stand beside her, someone who would fight for her rather than against her, was almost too beautiful to believe. But as she lay in the cooling water, as Marin's gentle hands worked the tangles from her hair, as the bond continued to pulse with warmth and reassurance, Neve allowed herself just for a moment to hope that it might be true. She slept deeply that night, for the first time in months, wrapped in soft blankets that smelled of cedar and pine. Her dreams were peaceful, filled with golden eyes and strong arms and a voice that whispered mine, 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 with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When she woke, it was to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of birds singing in the forest beyond. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the memories came flooding back. The fall, the rescue, the bond, the journey. And she sat up with a gasp, her hand flying to her belly. The baby. She needed to check on the baby. She closed her eyes and turned her healer's senses inward, searching for the tiny spark of life that had been growing inside her for nearly 3 months now. There, a flutter of energy, small but strong, pulsing with a vitality that brought tears of relief to her eyes. The baby had survived. Despite the fall, despite the stress, despite everything, her child was still alive. Thank you, she whispered to the moon goddess, to fate, to whatever power had seen fit to protect this innocent life. Thank you. A knock at the door startled her from her prayers. Come in, she called, pulling the blankets up to cover her thin sleeping shift. It was Marin, carrying a tray laden with food that made Neve's stomach growl. Fresh bread, soft cheese, sliced fruit, a pot of tea that smelled of ginger and honey. Good morning, my lady. The Alpha sends his regards and asks if you feel well enough to join him for luncheon. He wishes to show you the grounds and introduce you to the pack. Neve's heart rate quickened at the mention of Alexander. Yes, I would like that. Marin's smile was knowing as she set the tray on a small table near the window. I thought you might. I've laid out some clothes for you, nothing too formal, just comfortable robes suitable for walking. Is there anything else you need? What Neve needed was to understand what was happening to her, to make sense of the way her wolf strained toward Alexander like a flower turning toward the sun, to reconcile the fear that still lurked in the corners of her mind with the warmth that flooded through her every time she thought of him. But none of those things could be provided by a servant, no matter how kind. No, she said. Thank you, Marin, for everything. It's my pleasure, child. Marin paused at the door, her expression softening. He's a good man, you know, the best I've ever known. Whatever darkness you've come from, whatever shadows still haunt you, he will never add to them. That much I can promise you. She left before Neve could respond, and Neve was grateful for the solitude. She needed time to think, to process, to prepare herself for what lay ahead. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying to remember the last time she had tasted food that wasn't seasoned with fear. At the Wildfire Pack House, meals had been a minefield, each one carrying the potential for public humiliation or private punishment. She had learned to eat quickly, to keep her eyes down, to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. But here, alone in this beautiful room with sunlight warming her face and good food filling her belly, Neve felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she had almost forgotten its name. Peace. The robes Marin had chosen were simple but well made, a soft green that reminded Neve of spring leaves and new beginnings. They fit her body gently, accommodating the slight swell of her pregnancy without drawing attention to it. When she studied herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. The bruises were still visible, purple and yellow shadows marring her pale skin. The dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of months of broken sleep. But there was something different in her expression, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. She turned away from the mirror before she could analyze it too closely, and made her way through the fortress in search of Alexander. The halls were bustling with activity, servants carrying linens and trays, warriors walking in pairs with weapons at their hips, children running and laughing in a courtyard visible through an open window. Everyone she passed nodded respectfully, some offering tentative smiles that she returned with equal hesitation. Word of her arrival had clearly spread, and she could feel curious eyes following her progress. She found Alexander in a solar on the western side of the fortress, standing before a massive map that covered an entire wall. He was dressed simply today, in a loose white shirt that hung open at the throat and dark trousers tucked into well-worn boots. His hair was damp, as if he had recently bathed, and the sight of him, so casual, so at ease, made something flutter in Neve's chest. He turned at her approach, and his face transformed with a smile that stole her breath. "Neve, you look rested." "I slept well." She hovered in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "Better than I have in months." "Good." He crossed the room to her, and she was struck again by how large he was, tall and broad, and radiating a quiet power that should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel safe, protected, like nothing could touch her as long as he stood between her and the world. "I wanted to show you something. Will you walk with me?" She nodded and allowed him to take her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, his grip gentle but secure. Her wolf practically purred at the contact, pressing against her consciousness with unabashed delight. He led her through the fortress and out into the grounds beyond. Gardens stretched in carefully cultivated rows, bright with flowers and fragrant herbs. Training yards rang with the clash of practice swords and the grunts of sparring warriors. Stables housed horses that nickered soft greetings as they passed. But it was the final destination that made Neve's breath catch in her throat. A building set apart from the others, smaller but no less well constructed. The door was painted a deep blue, and above it hung a sign bearing a mortar and pestle, the universal symbol of healers. "The Pack's healing house," Alexander said, watching her face. "Our previous healer passed away last winter, and we've been making do with visiting practitioners and home remedies ever since. I thought perhaps, if you were willing, you might like to work here, to have a purpose, a place of your own." Neve stared at the building, tears pricking her eyes. He was giving her something she had never thought to have again, a way to use her gifts, to help others, to be more than just a burden or a possession. "You would trust me? After everything you've heard, everything they accused me of, I trust you." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I know the truth of who you are, Neve, not because of what anyone has told me, but because I can feel it through our bond. You are good, kind, gentle. Whatever lies the wildfire pack spread about you, I don't believe a single one." She turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of deception and finding only sincerity. "Why? Why are you being so kind to me?" His hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Because you are my mate, because you deserve kindness after everything you've suffered, and because he paused, his expression shifting to something raw and vulnerable. Because I have waited my entire life for you, Neve. I had almost given up hope that the goddess would ever bless me with a true mate. And now that I've found you, I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of that blessing. The words settled into her heart like seeds finding fertile ground. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to express the tangle of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. So instead, she simply leaned into his touch and allowed herself, for one precious moment, to accept the comfort he offered. A shout from the main gates shattered the moment. Neve's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice that followed, cold, commanding, dripping with contempt. A voice that had haunted her nightmares for months, a voice that could only belong to one person. I am Dominic Wildfire, Alpha of the Wildfire Pack, and I demand the return of what is rightfully mine. Her knees buckled. Alexander caught her before she could fall, pulling her close and turning his body to shield her from view. His muscles had gone rigid with tension, and when she looked up at his face, she saw something that made her heart stutter with fear. Rage. Pure, primal, devastating rage. Stay behind me, he growled, his voice barely recognizable. And do not, under any circumstances, let him see you. But Neve knew it was already too late. Dominic Wildfire had come for her, and nothing would stop him from claiming what he believed was his. Her hand moved to her belly, cradling the life within. Not just her. Their child. He had come for their child. And suddenly, with crystal clarity, Neve understood exactly why Wildfire had tracked her here. Not for love. He had never loved her. Not for pride. He could have found another mate easily enough. No, he had come because of what grew inside her. Because of the prophecy his Luna had whispered about in dark corners, the one about a child born of a healer's blood and an alpha's power. A child destined for greatness. A child he intended to destroy. Over her dead body, the gates of the fortress groaned as Dominic Wildfire's warriors forced them open. Neve watched from behind her mate's broad shoulders as a flood of armored wolves poured into the courtyard, their formation tight and aggressive, their eyes gleaming with the promise of violence. At their head rode Wildfire himself, resplendent in black leather and silver chainmail, his dark hair swept back from a face that had once seemed handsome to her, and now revealed itself as cruel, cold, empty of anything resembling humanity. There she is, Wildfire called, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. He swung down from his horse with practiced grace, his boots striking the cobblestones with a sound like a death knell. My wayward mate. Did you think you could run from me, Neve? Did you think distance would dissolve our bond? Neve's hand pressed harder against her belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. Her child. Her precious, innocent child, who had done nothing to deserve the fate this monster planned for them. Terror clawed at her throat, threatening to steal her voice, but she forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember that she was not the same broken woman who had fled the Wildfire Pack. She had found her strength again. She had found her true mate. She is not your mate. Alexander's voice rang out like a blade being drawn, sharp and dangerous. His warriors had assembled around them, a wall of loyal wolves ready to defend their home. She rejected you the moment you violated the sacred bond between mates. She is under my protection now. Wildfire's laugh was ugly, mocking. Your protection? And who exactly are you to offer such a thing? Some minor lord playing at being a hero? He strode closer, his warriors fanning out behind him, and Neve saw the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the fortress's defenses. I came prepared for war, boy. My pack outnumbers whatever ragtag force you've assembled here. Surrender the woman, and I'll consider letting your people live. You came prepared for war, Alexander agreed, and something in his tone made Wildfire pause. But you should have asked more questions about who you were declaring war against. He stepped forward, and as he did, he straightened to his full height. The power that had always simmered beneath his surface burst forth like a dam breaking, flooding the courtyard with an authority so absolute that even Wildfire's warriors took an involuntary step back. Neve felt it through their bond, a vast, ancient strength that spoke of bloodlines stretching back to the first wolves, of crowns worn and kingdoms ruled. I am Alexander Duskwalker, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. King of the Eastern Territories, Alpha of the Duskwalker Pack, and the woman you came to claim is my true mate, recognized by the moon goddess herself. He let that sink in, watching Wildfire's face pale. You have invaded my lands, threatened my people, and laid claim to my queen. The penalty for such offenses is death. Chaos erupted. Wildfire's expression twisted from shock to fury to desperate calculation in the span of a heartbeat. Kill them, he screamed, drawing his sword. Kill them all. The courtyard exploded into violence. Wolves shifted mid-stride, teeth and claws flashing in the morning light. Steel rang against steel as warriors clashed. Neve felt Alexander's hand close around her arm, pulling her toward the relative safety of the healing house even as he barked orders to his captains. Marin, get her inside. The healer appeared at Neve's side, her weathered face grim but determined. Come, child, this is no place for you. But Neve couldn't move. Her eyes had found Wildfire across the chaos of battle, and she saw the moment he spotted her. Saw the murderous intent that darkened his features as he began cutting his way toward her, leaving bodies in his wake. He wasn't fighting to win the battle. He was fighting to reach her child. No, she breathed, the word crystallizing something inside her. She was done running, done hiding, done being the victim of this man's cruelty. Marin, help the wounded. Alexander will need you when this is over. Neve, what are you? But she was already moving, walking toward the center of the courtyard with a calm she didn't fully understand. Her wolf, so long dormant, rose within her like a tide. Not the broken, beaten creature the Wildfire pack had left her with, but something stronger, something fierce, something that would protect its child or die trying. Wildfire saw her approach and laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. What is this? The little healer thinks she can fight me? He gestured for his warriors to fall back, clearly wanting this confrontation for himself. I almost admire your spirit, Neve. It's a shame I'll have to break it again. You can't break what you never owned. Her voice came out steady, surprising them both. She could feel Alexander's alarm through the bond, felt him trying to fight his way to her side, but she held up a hand. Trust me, she thought, pushing the feeling toward him. Please. Oh, but I did own you. Wildfire closed the distance between them, and she could smell him now. Pine smoke and old blood, the scent of nightmares. I claimed you. I planted my seed in your belly. By every law of our kind, you belong to me. You forced a bond that should have been sacred. Neve stood her ground even as every instinct screamed at her to run. You violated the gift of the goddess, and now you'll pay the price. She reached deep within herself, past the fear and the trauma and the months of suffering, and found the power that had always been there. The power that made her a healer, the ability to sense life and death, health and sickness, the delicate balance of the body and the corruption that could destroy it. She had always used it to heal. Now, she turned it to revelation. The physical mark on her shoulder had been fading since she found Alexander, burned away by the true bond. But the spiritual corruption Dominic had planted in her soul, that required more than passive healing, that required active rejection. The ancient words came to her as if whispered by the goddess herself. The rejection rite, spoken only in the most extreme circumstances, capable of severing not just the false bond, but the very darkness that had created it. She began to speak, her voice taking on an otherworldly resonance that made Wildfire stumble back, his face contorting with pain. I reject you, Dominic Wildfire, as my mate and my alpha. I reject the bond forced upon me through violence and deceit. I reject any claim you have over my body, my spirit, and my child. By the light of the moon goddess and the blood of my ancestors, I declare this bond severed, now and forever. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It felt like something being torn from her chest, like fire racing through her veins, like dying and being reborn in the same terrible instant. She heard herself scream, or maybe that was Wildfire screaming, his incomplete claim over her shattering like glass against stone. But she wasn't finished. As the broken bond dissolved between them, Neve reached out with her healer's gift and touched the darkness that had always lurked at the core of Dominic Wildfire's being. The poison he carried within him. Not physical, but spiritual. The corruption of a man who had violated sacred bonds, who had murdered and plotted and twisted the goddess's gifts for his own gain. She drew it forth. The darkness came out of him like smoke, black and oily and reeking of sulfur and betrayal. It coiled around him, visible to everyone in the courtyard, and she heard the gasps of horror from wolves on both sides of the battle as they saw their alpha's true nature revealed. What? What are you doing to me? Wildfire clawed at the smoke, but it clung to him, exposing every sin he had ever committed. Stop this. I command you to stop. I'm not doing anything to you, Neve said, her voice carrying across the suddenly still courtyard. I'm simply showing everyone what you really are, what you've always been. A murderer, a violator of the sacred bond, a man who would kill his own child because of prophecy and fear. She saw his warriors looking at their alpha with new eyes, saw the horror dawning on their faces as they understood what they had been following all this time. Many began to back away, lowering their weapons, their loyalty dissolving in the face of undeniable truth. Wildfire lunged at her with a roar of pure hatred, his claws extended for her throat. He never reached her. Alexander Duskwalker materialized between them like a shadow given form, his speed almost too fast to track. His hand closed around Wildfire's throat, and with a display of strength that made Neve's breath catch, he slammed the other alpha into the ground hard enough to crack the cobblestones. She was never yours? Alexander growled, his voice barely human. His eyes blazed gold, and Neve could feel the primal fury of his wolf barely contained beneath his skin. From the moment you touched her without consent, you forfeited any claim the goddess might have granted you. Wildfire spat blood, his face twisted with hatred even as Alexander's claws pressed against his throat. She carries my spawn, he snarled. My blood runs in that child's veins. You'll never be rid of me completely. Neve stepped forward, standing beside her true mate, and looked down at the man who had caused her so much suffering. She felt no hatred now, only a vast, peaceful certainty. This child is mine, she said, her voice steady. You claim my body, but you never touched my soul. The bond we share, she placed her hand over Alexander's heart, is true and pure, and blessed by the goddess herself. Whatever blood runs in my child's veins, they will be raised in love, in safety, in the knowledge that they are wanted and cherished. She met Wildfire's eyes one final time. You have no power here, not anymore. Alexander's killing blow was swift and merciful, more mercy than Wildfire had ever shown anyone. His claws tore through flesh and bone, and the light faded from those cold eyes forever. The body beneath him went still. It was over. Neve felt the moment like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. Years of fear and pain and running finally ended. She swayed on her feet, and Alexander was there instantly, his bloodied hands gentle as he caught her and pulled her against his chest. "It's over," he murmured against her hair, and she believed him. "You're safe now, both of you." The remaining wildfire warriors threw down their weapons, submitting to the Duskwalker forces or fleeing into the forest. Neve barely noticed them. All she could see, all she could feel, was the man holding her, her true mate, her protector, her king. The rest of the day passed in a blur of victory celebrations and hasty councils. Alexander refused to leave her side for more than moments at a time, his hand constantly seeking hers, his eyes checking on her well-being with an attention that made her heart ache. The Wildfire Pack's surviving nobles were given a choice: submit to Duskwalker rule or face exile. Most chose to submit, eager to distance themselves from the corruption their former alpha had represented. Even Lorcan, the soldier who had harassed Neve by the stream, had fought bravely in the battle, and afterward had knelt before her to beg forgiveness, his arrogance burned away by the truth of what Dominic had been. She had granted it. Mercy, she was learning, could be its own kind of strength. As the sun set over the fortress, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Alexander found Neve in the gardens where they had walked that morning. A lifetime ago, it seemed now. She was sitting on a stone bench, her hands resting on her belly, her face turned up to catch the last warm rays of light. "You should be resting," he said softly, settling beside her. "I've been resting all afternoon. Marin threatened to tie me to the bed if I didn't stop trying to help with the wounded." She smiled, but it faded as she looked at him. Really looked at him, taking in the dried blood on his clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension that still held his shoulders rigid. "You killed him." "I did. For me." He took her hands in his, turning her to face him fully. "For you. For our child. For every wolf he ever hurt with his cruelty and ambition. But mostly," his voice roughened, "because he touched you. Because he violated the most sacred bond our kind can share. Because when I think about what he did to you, what he planned to do, I feel a rage so deep it terrifies me." Neve freed one hand and raised it to his cheek, feeling the stubble rough against her palm. "I'm not afraid of you." "No?" He leaned into her touch, his eyes sliding closed. "You should be. I am an Alpha King, Neve. My wolf is powerful and possessive, and absolutely certain that you belong to us. Everything in me wants to claim you, mark you, make it so that every wolf who sees you knows exactly who you belong to." Her breath caught, but not from fear. Something else entirely was unfurling in her chest, something warm and wanting, something that had been dormant since long before Wildfire had forced his claim on her. Her wolf stirred, pressing against her consciousness with unmistakable intent. "Then do it," she whispered. His eyes flew open, gold swirling in their depths. "Neve, I choose you." She moved closer, close enough to feel his breath on her lips. "I choose this bond, this life, this future with you. I was broken when you found me, Alexander. Terrified and pregnant and so certain that I would never be able to trust anyone again. But you," her voice cracked, "you were patient, gentle. You gave me space to heal and a purpose to embrace, and you never once demanded anything in return." "I never wanted to demand." He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against his chest. "I only ever wanted to give." "Then give me this. Mark me. Let me mark you. Make this bond complete, so that I never have to wonder again if I'm truly yours." She felt his control shatter. He stood in one fluid motion, lifting her easily into his arms, and carried her through the darkening gardens toward the fortress. Servants scattered at the look on his face, pure primal intent, barely leashed, He kicked open the door to his chambers and laid her on the bed with a reverence that made tears prick her eyes. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice strained as he braced himself above her. The moonlight streaming through the window painted him in silver, catching the gold still flickering in his eyes. "Once this is done, it cannot be undone. You will be bound to me forever. I'm counting on it." She pulled him down to her. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, two people learning the taste and texture of each other, building the trust that would be the foundation of their bond. But gentleness gave way to hunger, hunger to desperate need, and soon Neve was clinging to him as sensation overwhelmed her. His hands were everywhere, mapping her body with a possessive attention that made her gasp and arch beneath him. When he finally settled his mouth at the junction of her neck and shoulder, she felt his whole body trembling with restraint. "Now," she breathed. "Please, Alexander, now." His bite broke her skin, and pain lanced through her, sharp and fierce and utterly consuming. For one terrible moment she thought she had made a mistake, that this would be like Wildfire's forced claim, that she would spend the rest of her life regretting this choice. Then the pain transformed. Pleasure flooded through her, cascading from the point where his teeth pierced her flesh like liquid fire. But more than pleasure, connection. A door opening between their souls, their minds, their hearts. She felt his emotions pour into her. Love so vast it stole her breath. Relief that she had chosen him. Fear of failing her. Determination to spend every day of his life proving worthy of her trust. Joy. Belonging. Home. Mine. He growled against her skin, his tongue laving over the mark he had made. "Yours," she agreed, and then her wolf surged forward. She flipped them, surprising him with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. He went willingly, his eyes wide with wonder as she straddled his hips and bent to the vulnerable curve of his throat. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her lips, could taste the salt of his skin, could sense through their half-formed bond how much he wanted this, how much he had dreamed of being marked in return. Her bite was not gentle. She sank her teeth into his flesh at the same spot where he had marked her, and she felt the bond roar to completion like a symphony reaching its crescendo. His blood was copper and power on her tongue, and through the bond she felt his ecstasy, his surrender, his utter devotion. He was hers now, hers as surely as she was his. "Yours," he whispered, his hand sliding up to cup her face as she released him. "I'm yours, Neve, now and always. My wolf, my throne, my life. All of it belongs to you." "And mine to you." She kissed the mark she had made, feeling the skin already beginning to heal. But the scar would remain forever, visible proof of their bond. "Mate. Mate," he agreed, pulling her down to lie against his chest. They held each other as the moon rose higher in the sky, as their bond settled into something steady and sure and unbreakable. Neve could feel him always now, a constant presence at the back of her mind, warm and reassuring as a heartbeat. When fear crept in around the edges of her thoughts, she felt him push back against it, surrounding her with love until the fear retreated. This was what a true mate bond felt like. This was what the goddess had intended when she blessed Wolfkind with the ability to find their perfect match. She fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time in years, she did not dream of darkness. The coronation took place 3 weeks later in the Great Hall of the Duskwalker Fortress. Neve stood before the assembled wolves in a gown of silver and gold, her mate beside her in his formal regalia, the crown of the Eastern Territories gleaming on his brow. The mark he had given her was visible above the neckline of her dress. She had refused to cover it, wanting everyone to see the bond they shared. "Wolves of the Eastern Territories," Alexander's voice rang out, "I present to you your Luna Queen, my mate, my equal, my partner in all things, Lady Neve Duskwalker." The cheers that erupted shook the rafters. Neve felt tears streaming down her cheeks as Alexander placed a matching crown on her head. Smaller, more delicate, but no less regal. She was no longer the broken woman who had been thrown down the stairs of the Wildfire pack house. She was a queen, a healer, a true mate, a mother. Alexander's hand settled over her belly, now obviously round with the child growing within her. Through their bond, she felt his love for that life. Not just acceptance, not mere tolerance, but genuine, overwhelming love. As if the child were his own. Because it was. Blood meant nothing. Choice meant everything. My family, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. My mate. My child. I don't care whose blood runs in those veins. This is my son or daughter, and I will love them fiercely until my last breath. Neve thought of the prophecy Dominic had feared, a child born of a healer's blood and an alpha's power, destined for greatness. He had wanted to destroy that destiny, but perhaps the prophecy had never been about destruction at all. Perhaps greatness was simply this. A child raised in love instead of fear, by parents who chose each other freely. She covered his hand with her own. You caught me, she said, remembering that first moment when she had been falling toward darkness and found herself held instead by light. You caught me, and you never let go. I never will. The celebration lasted long into the night, but eventually the last guests departed and the great hall fell silent. Neve stood at the window of the queen's chambers, her chambers now, shared with her king, and looked out over the lands that she would help rule. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, casting silver light over a kingdom at peace. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her back against a familiar chest. She leaned into the embrace, feeling the bond pulse between them with contentment. What are you thinking? Alexander asked. I'm thinking about the morning you found me, how broken I was, how certain I was that I would never feel safe again. She turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had become more precious to her than anything else in the world. I couldn't have imagined this, any of this. And now? She smiled, and it came easily now, naturally, without the shadow of fear that had haunted her for so long. Now I'm thinking about our child growing up in a home full of love, about building a healing practice that can serve wolves throughout the kingdom, about spending the rest of my life waking up beside you. He kissed her, slow and thorough, and she felt his happiness flood through their bond like sunshine. Then let's get started, he said when they finally parted. We have a lifetime ahead of us, my queen. She took his hand and led him toward the bed. They did.